Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a massive new study to solve a medical puzzle that worries a lot of new parents. So let's just dive right in. Meconium at birth. Is it a sign that something's wrong, or is it something else entirely? For years, this has been a real question. But today, we're going to play detective. We're going to follow the clues from a huge medical investigation to finally get some answers. Okay, first things first, let's meet our two main players here. On one hand, you have meconium staining. This is basically when the baby's first stool passes into the amniotic fluid before they're born. It's actually pretty common. But then you have meconium aspiration. Now that's when the baby actually breathes that stained fluid into their lungs. That's much, much rarer, and it's the one that really gets everyone's attention. So what even is meconium? Well, it's just a newborn's first feces. It's this thick, dark, kind of tar-like stuff. Now, seeing it before birth can be a sign that the baby's under a bit of stress. But, and this is a big but, it's also a totally normal sign of maturity in full-term babies. It really is all about timing and, as we're about to find out, where it ends up. And right here, this is the heart of the mystery. This major study points out that meconium staining happens in up to, 1 in 5 full-term deliveries? But the long-term effects? Well, they've been kind of murky. In fact, some older studies even hinted that it might have a weirdly protective benefit. A total head-scratcher, right? So, let's get into the investigation. To get to the bottom of all this confusion, researchers in Quebec launched this absolutely massive study, which was published in the journal Pediatric Pulmonology. Their goal? To finally get some clear answers. And when I say massive, I am not kidding. The scale here is just mind-blowing. They looked at the health records of almost 1.3 million children. They followed them from the moment they were born all the way up to age 5. This is the kind of epic data set that can actually solve a medical mystery for good. Their mission was super specific. They wanted to figure out if being exposed to meconium at birth meant you had a higher risk of being hospitalized for breathing problems later on. Things like bronchiolitis, asthma, or other allergies. And they compared 3 groups: babies who actually aspirated the meconium, babies who were just around the stained fluid, and babies who had no meconium exposure at all. All right, and here is where our little detective story takes a major turn. Because when the researchers first looked at the raw numbers, well, the clues didn't just not make sense, they pointed in a completely wild and unexpected direction. So take a close look at these graphs from this study. See that dotted line? That represents the babies with meconium staining, but no aspiration. Now look at every single chart for bronchiolitis, asthma, you name it. That dotted line is the lowest one. It seriously makes it look like those kids were healthier? I mean, this was just baffling, right? It seemed to back up those weird older theories that just being exposed to meconium without breathing it in might somehow be good for a baby. Like maybe it was giving their immune system a jumpstart or something. So, the big question became, is meconium staining actually good for babies? Or was there something else entirely going on here? Was this clue for real, or was it a total red herring leading them way off track? This is a classic case of what scientists call a confounding variable. It's basically a hidden factor that makes two things look connected when they really aren't. It's like that old example: ice cream sales and shark attacks both go up in the summer. But eating ice cream doesn't cause shark attacks, right? The summer heat causes both. And the researchers were pretty sure something similar was happening here. And bingo, here is the real culprit: gestational age. Turns out meconium staining is way more common in babies who are full-term or even a little post-term. In other words, more mature babies. And guess what? Those same mature babies already have a much lower risk of breathing problems because their lungs are just more developed. The so-called protection wasn't coming from the meconium at all. It was coming from being a healthy, full-term baby to begin with. And this is the absolute key. Once the scientists went back and adjusted their numbers to account for the baby's gestational age, bam, the case was cracked. That whole protective effect just completely disappeared, and the real story finally came out. So, after all that, what was the final verdict? Well, once the data was cleaned up and properly analyzed, the answer became crystal clear. The study found, without a doubt, that it's meconium aspiration, the act of breathing it in, that's linked to a much higher risk of being hospitalized for these conditions later in childhood. The staining by itself, no long-term negative effect. The danger was only in the aspiration. And these numbers are pretty significant.
For asthma, babies who had meconium aspiration had a 43% increased risk of being hospitalized compared to unexposed kids. That's a big deal.
And for bronchiolitis, which, is a really common and sometimes serious respiratory infection for infants, the risk of hospitalization was 24% higher for that same aspiration group. And this brings us right to the study's powerful conclusion, which basically solves our mystery once and for all. The danger lies only in the aspiration. Simple meconium staining on its own is not a long-term threat. Okay, so why does all this matter? Why is solving this mystery so important? What's the big takeaway here for parents, for doctors, for all of us? Well, the main message is really about separating the signal from the noise. For the huge number of parents who hear the words meconium staining during delivery, this study should be incredibly reassuring. It is not a risk factor for long-term breathing problems. The real concern, the signal we absolutely have to listen to, is meconium aspiration. That is a genuine risk factor, and it means that baby needs close follow-up care. And that leaves us with one last really important thought. This new clarity, it doesn't just solve an old mystery. It kind of creates a new mission. By confirming these long-term risks of aspiration, this research shows us just how critical it is to keep a close eye on these specific children and to come up with new ways to protect their respiratory health for years and years to come.